Count Agenor de Gasperin wrote a book about several subjects, the most important one being table tipping or telekinesis. The practice of table turning or table tipping is a paranormal one. One of the things that they would ask the table is how many nuts in a pocket or how many coins in a pouch there were. The paranormal force that moves the table would respond with raps. To clarify, the force that moves the table is a composite of all the individuals sitting at the table. Each person has a paranormal influence of their own, yet these forces can be at odds with one another. A person with a strong force or influence overpowers someone with a weaker force. When the forces are at odds with each other in this way, due to a difference of the wills, the overall force that moves the table becomes weaker because the people are no longer working together. When they ask the table to answer a question, the person with the most influence over the table would typically be the one providing the answer that is rapped out. This was a problem because they started out with one of the members who knew the answer, and that this meant that a weaker member with the correct answer would be overruled by a stronger member with the wrong answer. It was obvious that change was needed here. 2 and then later 3 members were given the correct answer, which meant they had a combined force that could overrule a single person with a stronger force. However, the most powerful member would regularly overrule a coalition of weaker members. There is a great emphasis in more modern telekinesis work to have rapport between all of the members at the table, which helps to solve this problem of members working against each other. It was also discovered that when some people were seated around the table, their force actively inhibited the movements of the table. This was not due to a lack of faith in the phenomena or a lack of goodwill, but rather for some other reason that was not entirely clear at the time. The likely explanation for this is that these people were too nervous or desired success too much. This problem was encountered by the author himself. If a person was uncomfortable then, they won't have any success. The Philip group also had a similar experience. The author had the luxury of having plenty of people, so he could remove counterproductive people from the table and replace them with new ones. Not everyone has the luxury of being able to replace people when the results aren't as strong. Thankfully, the author describes certain things that increase success. Persevering cheerfully even if things aren't going well, singing, making the table dance, not thinking about new experience, and insisting upon easy and amusing operations. After doing this, the table was much more active and obedient to their commands. This is a key point, because various people have all come to the conclusion that having a fun atmosphere in which the mind is occupied by some activity is very helpful in achieving telekinesis. The author succeeded in getting the table to move without anyone touching it. The members all raised their hands at a given signal, but maintained hand-to-hand contact with each other about an inch above the table. The table followed their linked hands, levitating upwards and rotating around 3 or 4 times. A similar experiment was attempted, except this time without trying to achieve turning from the table. By doing this, it was easier to maintain a circle of hands above the table. They ordered one of the table's feet to rise, and it obeyed. They ordered it to turn over, and it fell over even though no one was touching it. There is also the question of divination. For those of you who don't know, divination is the practice of finding hidden knowledge with supernatural methods. In the author's experience, he didn't find any evidence that the force involved with table tipping was actually able to divine answers. He goes on to explain that if someone was in the audience who is watching the table tipping knows the answer to a question that is asked, the force can give the correct answer in raps. This occurs when the audience member has a powerful force of their own. He says that if the tables truly have an ability to divine, then they can give correct answers even if no one at the experiment knows the answer. To test this, he suggests asking the table to rap out the first line of a randomly chosen page of a closed book. He confidently states that no spirit has read or will ever be able to read such a line. I'm not completely convinced of this. Regardless of external spiritual forces, humans have natural psychic powers that can be used to find hidden knowledge. The question that we should be asking is why they were not able to use this psychic ability to answer otherwise unknown questions. Presumably, the answer is a lack of practice or appropriate training. There is an idea that is still common even today, that to move an object with your paranormal force, you must first build up some kind of energy inside the object. This is demonstrably false. After accidentally breaking a table, the author's group moved to a new table, and then it began to immediately move after they linked hands above it. There are several belief systems, including New Age ideas, that involve the concept that there is some sort of energy that is all around us and flowing through everything. This is the sort of thing that leads people to say that this nebulous subtle energy is why everything in the world is magical. No one has ever successfully demonstrated that this energy exists or that literally everything has magical properties. The word energy is not particularly useful as it's just a placeholder. People will say that the energy of a certain place is off in a metaphorical sense. They usually don't mean that there is a literal source of power that can be harnessed in that specific location. Likewise, there is a similar popular idea that there is some sort of subtle body that is directly responsible for telekinesis, which requires you to be next to the object to influence it. This idea can also be disproven to a degree by the ability to move objects at a distance, which the author also talks about. Dispelling misconceptions like these are really important because I'm trying to make a distinction between myth and fact. In another instance, the author talks about the absence of a member who had much influence over the table. This absence significantly weakened the phenomena, but even without this member, they were still able to achieve some results. He also talks about how this phenomena started after 5 or 6 minutes of concentration. The specifics of this concentration technique are not mentioned, but it appears that the author's group succeeded in willing phenomena to occur, where the more modern Sorak group failed. He also mentions that the need for muscular pressure subsided to the pressure of their commands, which leads me to believe that they started out by moving the table with physical force, and gradually the paranormal force took over. This is supported by another statement that talks about how paranormal elevations were bought with the expenditure of a considerable amount of strength. Clearly this was tiring to the members, and we don't need the pursuit of the paranormal to turn into some sort of weightlifting session. The author also says that a given position and a circular force are not of themselves enough to call this paranormal force into existence. This is, in essence, the realization that ritual by itself is not paranormal. Many people with more of an occult perspective need to understand this because the ritual itself is not the magic. The use of latent human talents through our will is the actual source of paranormal influence. Now, I'll give you a summary of the instructions that the author gives on how to do table tipping yourself. First of all, there is a chief of the members that gives orders with absolute confidence and cheerfulness. The members all repeat the command simultaneously, which focuses their thoughts. This is also referred to as indirect control in the more modern literature. Since muscular movement of the table appears to be key for this method, the members will move the table in unison through gentle touch at the command of the chief. I say gentle touch because nothing is achieved by physically wearing yourself out. You just need to start out with a light table that can be moved with a gentle touch. We also want to create a fun atmosphere where people sing, make jokes, and the table is commanded to do simple, amusing things. Then we want to start out with simple rotations or side-to-side movements of the table, and if the table starts to become weaker, you should return to these simple movements. Next, we have the chief command each of the feet of the table to move one after the other. If any of the feet refuse to obey, then it is likely a person who is next to this leg who is the cause. If you can replace this person, do so. If you don't have enough people to do this, the author does not provide a solution. However, I would recommend that you continue with some simple movements and come back to try each of the legs later. It is likely the case that the person just needs some practice to better develop his abilities. Just keep practicing until each of the legs moves with absolute certainty on command. When you have continued to progress to the point that the table becomes very energetic and obedient, then you can try to achieve movement without contact. I have to mention, however, that trying to achieve this should not be even thought of at the beginning of the session when the members are not enthusiastic enough yet, or at the end of the session when the members are too tired. The author didn't give any instructions about how to achieve wrappings in response to questions. I don't see this as a significant problem though, because you can achieve wrappings before any paranormal table movement begins, as the Philip group demonstrated. The author's views are a bit antiquated concerning the idea that you must have an unbroken chain of hands around the table. This has been demonstrated to not be necessary, and you can just place your hands on the table in whatever way you find to be comfortable. Some more general advice is that you should not let yourself get irritated, angry, impatient, nervous, or anxious, as all of these things will hinder success. Do not get disappointed if things are not going well right away. Persistence will pay off. You can also rekindle the paranormal force if it starts to die down by bringing back your excitement, shouting enthusiastically, etc. You should also minimize the amount of witnesses that are allowed to participate in the setting, and don't let them make loud noises or other distractions. The last bit of advice is that commands should almost always be done in a loud voice. If they are made in a low tone, then the effect of the suggestion is diminished and the thoughts of the members tend to wander. There is an exception to this rule in the case that you wish to ask the force to give a question that is known by a single member. This appears to be the only time that you want to give the command softly. Finally, the Christian apologist Tertullian mentions in chapter 23 of his book Apology that there are some sorcerers who use goats and tables to divine. It's not clear from what culture these practices came from, but it seems to be the case that these tables were used to get paranormal responses in a similar manner to more modern table tipping. This is the earliest historical mention of this sort of paranormal interaction with tables that I am aware of.